Jason Peter Todd was born in Gotham to drug addicts Willis and Kathy Todd, who would try to sell him to settle their debt with the local gangs, but would be rejected, causing Willis to resent Jason and abuse him for much of his early life. Until, at the age of 13, Jason would sell his parents out to the Maronis, who would execute them. He would then live on his own until the age of 15, when he would walk into a fight between Batman and the Joker, and would save Batman, and then using one of his grapple hooks would defeat the Joker, but before he could finish him off, Batman would stop and have him arrested. Months later, Batman would approach Jason, giving him a Robin uniform and a grapple gun, and told the teen that he had one night to impress the Dark Knight, which he apparently did, becoming the second Robin. During his short tenure as the Dark Knight's sidekick, Jason would butt heads with Bruce constantly, never truly feeling like a partner. This, along with Jason's temper, would strain the relationship even further. One day, as Batman faced the Joker, Jason would intervene and would be knocked out and taken to Arkham Asylum, where over the course of a year, he would be tortured physically and psychologically, with the Joker beating him as well as letting the other Arkham inmates beat them themselves, branding his face with a J, showing him a picture of Bruce with his replacement Tim Drake, and even shooting him to send a fake death video to Batman. Eventually, during the Arkham Asylum incident, Jason would break free only to be confronted by Deathstroke, who had been hired by the Joker to keep him contained but would convince Deathstroke to join him instead, and together they would rob Bruce Wayne, and Jason would beat the new Robin, escaping. Over the next year and a half, Jason would train and build an army dedicated to enacting his revenge on the Dark Knight, starting by creating the new identity of the Arkham Knight. After the Joker's death, Jason would form a partnership with Scarecrow, agreeing to aid him in developing a new toxin. And finally, a year after Joker's death, Jason would make his move, having Scarecrow announce his intentions to Gotham, and the city would be evacuated save for the criminals, cops, and Batman himself. Jason would then launch his attack, unleashing his entire army on Gotham, taking over. During the initial assault, he'd confront Bruce, sending a remote-controlled helicopter to face him, but the chopper would be destroyed. Jason would then take a small squad to kidnap Barbara Gordon, the former Batgirl, and Bruce's support, Oracle. Knowing Batman would follow him, Jason would lay several traps for Bruce, who would be slowed down and eventually would be ambushed by Jason, but would survive as Jason wanted to drag out his revenge for the rest of the night. This would backfire severely, as Batman would take down the majority of Jason's army, forcing him to confront his former mentor directly with Scarecrow's toxin, but this would again backfire and Jason would be defeated. Now being humiliated and even having control of his army taken away by Scarecrow, Jason would have no choice but to kidnap James Gordon, forcing Batman to confront him, where Jason would finally reveal his real identity. After a brief confrontation, Jason would take his sniping position, but Bruce would take him down. And confronted by his former mentor, Jason would finally break down and flee, realizing just how far Joker's torture had made him go. A couple hours later, Jason would learn that Bruce had been captured and would go to Arkham Asylum to free him from Scarecrow, shooting the gun from his hand in one of Bruce's restraints, freeing him and allowing him to take down Scarecrow. But the damage had already been done, and now his identity had been revealed to the world, and Bruce would flee into his manor before it would explode, seemingly killing both him and his butler, Alfred. Now with nowhere to go, Jason would choose to stay in Gotham, honoring Bruce's memory, becoming a vigilante, and cleaning up the streets of crime with lethal methods as the Red Hood. As a quick disclaimer, due to the nature of Telltale games, some elements of the story are player determined, and due to this, I will be using my playthrough for any moments in Vicky's story that are affected in this way. Victoria Arkham was born into Gotham to the heads of Arkham Asylum, and while little is known about them, they seem to be honest and caring people. At a young age, her parents would be assassinated by the order of Thomas Wayne, who was sending his enemies there under false pretenses to further the influence of he and his allies, crime lord Carmine Falcone and Mayor Hamilton Hill. After this, Vicky would be placed in foster care and would eventually be adopted by the Vales, who would abuse Vicky, beating her for no reason and locking her in a small cell for days on end. It would be there where her hatred for the Waynes, Vales, and Gotham in general would first create the Lady Arkham identity. Vicky would eventually leave the Vales, however, would stay in contact with her foster brother. As an adult, Vicky would become a reporter, using her connections to meet various people such as Oswald Cobblepot, whose mother suffered a similar fate as her parents, and the children of Arkham, people seeking justice for those falsely imprisoned, who she would eventually come to control as Lady Arkham. Eventually, she would use her connections to meet the only Wayne survivor, Bruce Wayne, and would begin earning his trust by having information about his family leaked into the public, and then giving him a chance to speak out about what he thought to be just rumors. Bruce would repay her by giving her information that would prove Mayor Hill's corruption. Vicky would then have Oswald assassinate Carmine Falcone, attack a debate between Hill and his political opponent Harvey Dent, revealing the Lady Arkham identity, and would even attend the debate and would pretend to be held at gunpoint, injecting both Hill and Dent with a toxin that makes you act on your true feelings. However, Batman would intervene, saving Dent, but Oswald would succeed in killing Hill. Vicky would then lure Batman out, releasing a false interview with her alter ego, luring Batman into a trap. She'd then work with the thief Catwoman, who had a debt to repay to Penguin, but knowing Batman was waiting, and that they had worked together, would take Catwoman hostage to force him out. And while Batman succeeded in destroying the train car Vicky planned to use to release the toxin on a wide scale, Vicky would still succeed in critically injuring him, but he'd escape with the aid of Catwoman. The next day, Vicky would appear at a press conference where Oswald would be handed the CEO position of Wayne Enterprises, where she would inject him with the toxin, revealing herself to Bruce, who, under the effects of the toxin, would then brutally attack Oswald and be put in Arkham Asylum by Mayor Dent. After this, Victoria would murder the Vales and would lay low, acting as Lady Arkham, and would then let things play out until she'd learned that Bruce had been let out of Arkham, and she'd go to his manor where she'd kidnap his butler, Alfred Pennyworth, eventually taking him to Arkham Asylum, luring in Batman. Vicky would eventually be chased into the depths of the asylum and would hold Alfred hostage, forcing Batman to remove his cowl, revealing that he was in fact Bruce Wayne. In shock, not believing who she believed a just vigilante in Batman, who she also believed to be her mortal enemy in Bruce Wayne, would finally break and would attack, and while nearly beating the Dark Knight, she would end up defeated, but as she fled, she would be crushed by falling debris as Bruce and Alfred escaped. Hello and welcome everyone to another versus matchup where I will be pitting Jason Todd, the Arkham Knight, versus Victoria Arkham, otherwise known as Lady Arkham. Two militia leaders with the sole purpose of taking down Bruce Wayne for having wronged them in some form or another. Now, this fight will involve Jason as the Arkham Knight, not as the Red Hood. And while I know there is very little difference between both of these identities as a fighter, there are some slight differences that may affect the outcome of a match. Also, due to there being very little fan art of Lady Arkham, I will be forced to use in-game footage in place of fan art, as there is genuinely that little art of this character, and I'm sure you guys don't want to look at the same 6 images of her throughout a 20+ minute video. And finally, for my sources, I will be using the Arkham Knight and its tie-in comics, and the Telltale Batman game. Right, with all that out of the way, let's start by breaking these two down physically. During the events of Batman Arkham Knight, Jason Todd was a young man in his early 20s, standing at 6 feet tall and weighing 200 pounds. Entering his very early prime and in peak physical condition, Jason was all but superhuman in his physical abilities. Strength-wise, he could effortlessly snap necks and other bones, scales to character like Bruce, Dick, and Tim, who could damage superpowered beings like Bane and Killer Croc with their punches alone, and could momentarily match Batman in his prime, who at the same age as Jason could send people flying. His speed is also comparable to Batman, who is capable of matching entire groups of enemies at once, and should be able to replicate Batman's rocket dodge feat of dodging an already fired rocket which moves at 375 feet a second. Stamina really shouldn't be an issue for him, as he's been trained to go long periods of time without rest and enduring continuous combat encounters. Jason's durability, while above the normal limits, is nothing out of the realm of the survivability, and if he takes enough damage, he will go down just like anyone else. However, he did take a shot from the Batmobile's riot rounds, which will knock out even fully armored men, though this could be due to his armor's protection. At the time of her death, Victoria Arkham was a human female in her early 30s, standing at around 5 feet 8 inches and likely weighed around 130 pounds, and would be in her physical prime. While not as physically strong as people like Harvey Dent and Bruce Wayne, she can still hold her own against physically stronger opponents, going toe-to-toe with and even injuring Batman in their fights, who was capable of kicking her through solid stone. Her speed is similarly enhanced, being able to keep up with Batman and even swatting away his batarangs and Batclaw, and used her energy boots to maneuver through a fight faster, meaning that her reflexes would need to be above that of most humans in order for her to use this gear. We don't have much to go on for stamina, as she's only faced Batman twice, and after being defeated in their second encounter, she was visibly winded. Durability is another element we don't know much about, as there's nothing to suggest that she'd survive anything that would put down a normal human. However, her pain resistance seems to be heightened as she's gotten back up from being hit from her own energy blasts in a fight with Batman and even being kicked through solid stone, which suggests to me that she has the pain threshold needed to fight through broken bones and possibly even ruptured organs. This area is surprisingly close, with both scaling to peak human status, but in the end, one's abilities are superior. To start off with, Jason has the edge in strength. While true that Vicky could keep up with Bruce, who is stronger than her, Jason scales to his version of Bruce, who is himself stronger than Victoria's version, placing Jason above her by default. Speed is also clear-cut for Jason, again scaling to Bruce, who dodged a rocket that moves at 375 feet a second, and while Vicky's own speed would need to be above the norm to compensate with her gear, she has nothing that puts her on par with this feat. Stamina should similarly go to Jason, who can fight off entire waves of goons and not even slow down, while Vicky, after a single fight with Bruce, was winded. Durability is pretty even as far as I can tell, with both surviving slightly more than a normal human and having a much higher pain threshold, but are still more or less human in terms of their limits. Really, this is no question. Jason holds the advantage in every way except durability, where they match each other. Even the fact that Victoria is further into her prime doesn't help, as Jason would have needed to build himself to be more physically capable as an active vigilante, who directly sought out combat in comparison to Vicky, who played a more commanding role, only directly confronting Batman as a last resort, or after being provoked by the reveal of his true identity. So it is for these reasons that I give Jason the edge in physical abilities. As a member of the Bat family, it should be no surprise that Jason is going to be coming into this fight packed to the teeth with gear. The first piece of equipment in Jason's arsenal were a pair of large, high-caliber handguns capable of piercing the weakest part of Batman's armor, and can even combine together to create a sniper rifle. A set of flashbang grenades to stun his opponents, a grapple gun to zip to his opponents and deliver quick strikes, or to move himself to an upper vantage point to get a better view of the area. And finally, his custom armor, which was handcrafted to counter Batman's arsenal, along with incorporating many elements of his mentor's tools as his detective vision and protection measures. As Lady Arkham, Victoria created a small yet effective set of gear to let her better combat high-level fighters. The first of which was her energy staff, a 5.5-foot-long staff with a mechanism on one end that fires kinetic energy. This weapon can send people flying or even deal fatal damage with a single shot. Her boots are equipped with the same technology, however, she can also use them to hover or boost her speed and strength of her kicks. From what I can tell, her suit seems to have some sort of protective padding protecting her from blunt force, as she was relatively okay after being kicked through a stone pillar and being thrown into a statue so hard it shattered, even withstanding her own energy blasts. This is yet another match where gear comes down to quality versus quantity, as while Jason has more gear for more scenarios, Vicky's staff and boots let her specialize as a close quarters fighter. And that being said, it's no surprise in terms of close range combat, Victoria's staff and boots would be far more effective when compared to Jason's pistols, as her staff is a weapon actually made for physical combat, along with its size making it easier to defend with and to keep Jason out of range. Similarly, it should be no question that Jason's gear would give him an advantage in a mid to long range fight thanks to his pistol sniper hybrid allowing him to fire from both ranges. His flashbangs and bat claws would likely be ineffective overall, as been shown projectile deflection, even blasting them away. So it's really not too much of a stretch to say that she might even be able to fire a flashbang back at him if he isn't careful. Their armor should be about even, with both providing protection from blows that would normally incapacitate or cripple someone. Though Jason's detective vision wouldn't be that effective outside of a specific situation of Vicky attempting to use stealth, which is unlikely to occur once combat has already started. Overall, who has the advantage depends entirely on range, but the issue is both fighters have tools to actively change the range that they are fighting at, with Jason's Batclaw and Vicky's hover boots, so the second one of these two realizes they're at a disadvantage, they'll either increase or close the distance, respectively, and they can't exactly stop each other from doing so. So really, this category would come down to the environment. In an enclosed space where there aren't many places for Jason to move to, Vicky would have the advantage, and in an open space where Jason could get to a vantage point and let her or lose her line of sight, he would have the advantage. However, as I'm sure many of you are expecting, this fight is going to take place in the abandoned wing of Arkham Asylum. So for the specific circumstances that I have chosen, Victoria will have the slight edge in weapons/equipment. As Robin, Jason would have undergone extensive training to be prepared for a variety of combat situations, and he even furthered his knowledge of combat as the Arkham Knight, learning from Deathstroke in methods of assassination. One fighting style he would use is Taekwondo, a mostly kick-based fighting style that also teaches many mobile attacks to keep pressure on opponents. Jason would mainly use this style to stun opponents before implementing quick strikes to bring them down and eliminating them for good. Krav Maga is a fighting style he would implement into literally every battle he took place in, as this is a style based on self-defense and disarming opponents with simple but effective maneuvers, primarily used for non-lethal takedowns, but I have a feeling Jason has modified these. Finally, Muay Thai was a fighting style similar to kickboxing, but teaching the user to use the elbow and knee rather than just the hand and feet, effectively allowing the user to implement their full body as a weapon. While no doubt a skilled hand-to-hand fighter, Jason's tactics are something of a mixed bag. While on one hand, Jason has the teaching and experience from his history as Robin and his partnership with Deathstroke, clearly teaching him how to take down entire criminal empires, as seen when he destroyed Black Mac's organization in what seems to be a single night, and even has a clear understanding of his limits as shown in his encounter with Batman. But on the other hand, his temper and PTSD from Joker has heavily affected his mental state, making him prone to outbursts of rage and developing a tunnel vision. Very little is known about Victoria's combative history, with the origins of her skill being an unsolved mystery. However, due to her ability to keep up with Bruce as a combatant, it should be assumed that she spent at least a good amount of time developing her skills, likely having learned from some of the best. Her main fighting style while unarmed would be Taekwondo, a mainly kick-oriented martial art with an emphasis on mobility and speed to pressure opponents with fast, mobile, high-power attacks, which she would normally boost with her energy boots, giving them even more speed and power. Victoria's use of her staff seems to be a somewhat reactionary fighting style, mostly countering, creating openings which she would then follow up with strong strikes meant to inflict high damage, which to me resembles Form 5 Gems, which is a mixture of high power-based strikes, defense, and countering in order to wear down an opponent before striking them down. Vicky's tactics aren't really at the forefront of her mind when in combat. To start off with, she is incredibly hot-headed and prone to outbursts, especially when confronted by the source of her rage. She also seemed to serve more of a commanding role as Lady Arkham, sending her goons out until it was absolutely necessary for her to directly intervene. In all instances where she got directly involved, showing that direct combat encounters were not her preferred way of dealing with opponents. However, this isn't to say that she's incapable in this area, as she was able to lead Batman into a trap-infested ruin, and clearly knows how to use her gear to her advantage. And in the right situations is even capable of controlling the pace of a fight, as shown with her first fight with Batman. Right, so before I break this section down, there is something I need to address that I'm sure some of you have already posted about in the comment section. You know who you are. And that is the vast skill difference between the Batman of Arkham Knight and of the Telltale series. However, I don't think this is as big of a handicap for Victoria as you might think, for one simple reason. There is no way in hell that this version of Jason could beat Arkham Bruce in hand-to-hand combat. The closest person to Jason's skill level that we know of in the Arkham series is Deathstroke, who seemed to respect him as a fighter, but even then, Bruce effortlessly one-shotted Deathstroke. Hell, Jason even knew this to the point where even when bloodlusted to the point of letting millions be gassed by Scarecrow for the sake of his revenge, he still refused to engage in close quarters combat, with Jason only directly attacking once there was no other option. Right, now that I have that mini rant out of the way for all the comments I'm going to be getting, these two are very similar in terms of both their fighting styles and their tactics. Starting off with their uses of Taekwondo, I'd say that Vicky's use would be more effective thanks to it being her main fighting style when unarmed, rather than Jason, who only takes elements of it into his style, and is also boosted with her gear, allowing her to kick harder and faster than Jason would be able to. Jason's Krav Maga would only add incentive for Vicky to use her boots more, as she'd be capable of countering any of her non-boosted attacks. When it comes to Krav Maga versus Vicky's Gems, I feel it depends entirely on the staff's energy blasts, as there is no reason Jake shouldn't be intimately familiar with staff-based combat, as both Dick and Tim used it as their main weapon under the mantle of Robin, so it stands to reason that Jason used one as well. On top of that, his training with Deathstroke would give him even more experience fighting against this weapon, so Victoria really shouldn't be bringing any techniques Jason hasn't used or faced before. However, the staff's extra abilities would give him some issues as long as it is powerful enough to send people flying or even kill them. Finally, Jason's Muay Thai would keep Vicky on her toes, as it would make Jason a threat not only even in very close quarters grapples, and would let him use more points on his body more effectively, as opposed to Taekwondo being a very kick-centric fighting style. So I favor Muay Thai even with the boost of her boots. Overall, I favor Jason as a combatant. Not only would he be more versatile in his combative style, but he would also be capable of taking away Victoria's greatest asset in this fight, the staff. Which, to mention once again, he is likely very familiar with staff in combat, both from his time as Robin and from training with Deathstroke. That, along with him seeming to have a better grasp of tactics even when in a full-blown rage overall puts him above Vicky. And the final nail in this coffin is ironically what carried Victoria through most of this comparison: the boost of her gear. To be blunt, if you need to rely on ability enhancing gear to keep up with an opponent, you are not going to last in the long run, especially someone like Jason, who with his own plethora of gear, which gives him his own distinct edge in other areas. And with that, I give Jason the edge in combat skills and tactics. Let's set up this fight. Obviously, it's going to take place in the abandoned wing of Arkham Asylum. Let's say that after a recent breakout, the asylum has been temporarily cleared out for repairs, and that while this is going on, Jason returns and runs into Victoria, who is setting up her base. Victoria Arkham stood alone in the abandoned chapel of Arkham Asylum. Her plans were almost complete. Only a few more weeks and everything would be ready. She'd get rid of Gotham and the Waynes once and for all, finally avenging her parents. She's interrupted from these thoughts when one of the traps she had set goes off and the entrance to the chapel collapses just as a man in some sort of armor rolls past the debris. Vicky quickly gets her staff ready and demands to know who the intruder is. Jason, who just narrowly evaded being crushed, is equally as shocked to see that the other person knows about the abandoned wing and draws his guns firing into her chest. However, Vicky is protected by her armor and gets into cover behind a pillar. Jason would slowly move towards her cover only to be struck in the head just as he's turning the corner. He recovers and uses his guns to block just before she brings it down on his head, holding her off for a moment, asking her who she is and how she found this place, but Vicky would just respond with,
No, I asked you first.
As she activates her staff blast, sending Jason into another pillar. He manages to land on his feet just in time to dodge Victoria's kick, which shatters the pillar in half. Jason would fire, but Vicky manages to move his hand with the staff just in time not to get shot again. She then strikes him in the shoulder and tries to bash the staff into his face, but Jason anticipated this and grabs the staff. The two struggle for a second before Vicky gets the idea to headbutt Jason. Doing so, however, he does the same, and thanks to his thicker visor, she's the one stunned, and Jason repeats the action, ramming his head into hers over and over again. Lady Arkham knows that she has to do something and activates her hover boots, lifting both of them into the air. Jason holds on as Victoria regains control and flies him into a wall, smashing him so hard against it that there's a small dent formed in the wall. Keeping up the pressure, she pushes the staff against his throat and begins to choke the life out of him. But thinking fast, Jason reaches down into his belt and grabs a flash grenade, pulling the pin and holding it right up to Vicky's face and letting it go off, blinding and disorienting both of them. Jason is dropped to the ground as Vicky loses control and flies headfirst into the ceiling before falling to the ground, even more dazed than the Arkham Knight, who wastes no time kicking her in the ribs as Jason is on her in a second, however, and pistol whips her in the face, cracking her mask open. Jason decides then and there to end her and raises his guns to fire, only to be blasted back into a wall, hitting his head and cracking his visor. Getting to his knees as Victoria calmly walks at him, twirling her staff. Deciding that staff has been a pain in the ass and that he needs to finally get rid of it, Jason gets up and rips off the shattered visor as his armor turns crimson and he pulls out his back claw, firing it, but it's deflected and Vicky closes the gap, making the weapon useless as Jason readies his guns. He then starts paying close attention to Vicky's movements, keeping her busy with his guns and Muay Thai and avoiding her stronger attacks, until he would spot an opening and in a single motion dodges her strike and grabs the staff. He'd then kick her leg out from under her, dropping her to one knee before smashing her own weapon into her exposed temple, finally twisting the weapon out of her as before knocking her back to the ground. Victoria, in a daze, looks up to see Jason break her staff over his knee before tossing the halves away and advancing on her. Now, pretty pissed off over the loss of her personal weapon, Vicky rushes in with a barrage of enhanced kicks. Jason manages to dodge a few and ducks under one, following up with a strike to her rib, but Vicky powers through and manages to hit him square in the chest, sending him back a few feet. Jason stops himself and gets right back in, meeting her kicks with his own, trusting that his armor will protect his legs from the impact. And he actually manages to work through the pain of the first few kicks, but he knows that he needs to find some other way of fighting her as his leg is starting to hurt like hell. Before he can, however, Vicky surprises him with an elbow to the jaw and manages to get him into a chokehold and tries once again to choke him out. Jason returns the favor, elbowing her in the ribs, weakening her grip enough to free himself, pulling out his pistols and shooting her in the leg before bringing both arms down on her back. As Lady Arkham tries to get back up, she's lifted up and thrown across the floor. Looking up, she sees half of her staff with the blast tech on it and grabs it, turning around to finish this. Unfortunately, though, she never gets the chance as Jason shoots her wrist, forcing her to drop the weapon immediately. He then fires into her knee, dropping her down, then into her shoulder, once into her gut, and finally, having made his way over, shoots her point blank in the head, shattering the Lady Arkham mask, revealing her identity to him. Wait, Vale? Jason would ask, stunned at the revelation. Taking this opportunity to strike, Vicky activates her boots, kicking at Jason's ribs. However, he catches her leg, gritting his teeth through the pain, and brings his elbow down, breaking it, before throwing her to the side. Vicky tries to get up, but Jason holds her down with his boot and aims at her, trying to get answers. But Victoria is enraged and isn't listening, throwing out accusations and calling him every name in the book. Saying this, Jason decides that she wouldn't of any use and aims, but before he finishes her off, she asks something that catches his attention. If that bastard Bruce Wayne was the one that sent him, and threatens to kill the billionaire once she's finished with the night. Hold on. You want Bruce Wayne dead too? This catches Victoria off guard as Jason gets up and radios Deathstroke. And as she begins to lose consciousness from her injuries, Jason kneels down saying, Slade, send a medic down to the asylum. I think we found a new volunteer. And with that, I declare Jason Todd, the Arkham Knight, the winner. Well, I wish I could say this outcome was a surprise, but come on, we all knew how this was going to turn out. The only physical area where Vicky even keeps up is durability, and even then, it's mostly due to both of them being constrained to human limits rather than actually having survived in equally deadly attacks. While true that Vicky's gear would give her the advantage in this sort of engagement, that advantage relies on her keeping the staff. And unfortunately for her, Jason, or really any of the three Arkham vs. Robins, are terrible matchups for her specifically because of the staff, which seems to be a standard part of the Robin mantle in the Arkhamverse. And Jason especially would give her hell as he trained with Deathstroke, giving him even more experience to use against her. And while I don't think the skill difference between Victoria and Jason is as vast as the two Batmans of their universes, there is clearly enough of a difference that Jason has a comfortable lead in this department even before we get into the specifics of their fighting style. Overall, Victoria simply wasn't bringing any of what she needed to this fight in order to win. In order for Victoria to beat Jason, she would need to completely change her fighting style and change the staff out for some other weapon. In this fight, a more aggressive fighting style like Ataru and something like Nightwing's Eskrima sticks would give her much better odds. But that's just my opinion. What do you think? Do you agree that the Arkham Knight is the superior Arkham namesake, or do you think that Lady Arkham would somehow bring down this fallen Robin? Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and if I got anything wrong, please feel free to correct me. Right, with all that, I'm Ray932, and I will see you next time.
Attention, entire world! Hear my proclamation! I am Lelouch V. Britannia, Emperor of the Holy Britannian Empire and your only ruler! Schneisel has surrendered to me. As a result of this, I am now in control of both the Damocles and the Flea weapons. And even the Black Knights no longer possess the strength to oppose me now. If anyone dares to resist my supreme authority, they shall know the devastating power of the Fleas. Those who could challenge my military rule no longer exist. Yes, from this day, from this moment forward, the world belongs to me. Lelouch V. Britannia commands you. Obey me, subjects! Obey me, world! All hail Lelouch!
That's right. I am Kira. And what can you do? Kill me right here? Hear this. I'm not only Kira, but I am also God of the New World.
I feel it deep within, it's just beneath the skin. I must confess that I
Feel like a monster.
hate what I've become. The nightmare's just begun. I must confess that I